Some people in this world are on the front lines of the struggle between good and evil, and some, like us, bear witness. I'm Therese Apel.
And I'm Nicole Crowell. You may have heard us as we worked on stories and series about law enforcement and crime. And it's safe to say we've seen some of the best and worst of human nature.
We decided there's no greater honor than bringing you the stories of the men and women who seek out the monsters, who speak for the victims, and who put the pieces together on some of the biggest Mississippi crime stories of our time.
Welcome to Investigation Homicide.
Hey everybody, thanks for watching. Just got the cue. I went early. Sorry. Thanks for watching. I'm Therese Apel. You are watching Investigation Homicide, or listening if you're listening to us on a podcast. Today, we're here to talk about probably one of the biggest cases of my career. And I think it's like that for anybody that was touched by this case. Kingston Frazier was a 6-year-old, and he was in his mom's car when it was stolen. And we're going to get into all the bits and pieces of that. First, I want to introduce my partner in crime, Nicole Crowell.
Hello, everybody.
She's here. Nicole, tell us about where you were when this case started.
Okay, so we did talk a little bit about this right before we started the podcast, and I think that this is one of those events that you remember where you were when you heard about it. And we all talked about, like, well, of course you were there, but how it impacted us in that moment and how we remember exactly where we were. And I was working. I had just moved here after college about 10 years ago, and I was working at a psychiatrist's office, and I was working the late night shift. And I remember hearing about it, and I was like, so I was only having like a small amount of patients. And I remember bringing somebody back there. It was this little bit elderly lady, and we were talking about it, and we both just started crying. And I'm like, I don't understand what happened. Yeah, I had just moved here, so I didn't know, excuse me, I didn't know about the stuff that happens in Jackson and stuff like that. Don't go to Jackson, blah, blah, blah. And so I remember that very vividly. That was one of the first big cases that happened here that I remember. And we all talk about it all the time, how Therese like has to make me cry. It's like a running joke in our relationship where it doesn't happen very often.
Mm-hmm.
You know, usually Therese is the one to cry,
Right.
but it takes something really hit me hard to make me cry in the moment, to where I can't really like control it. It's usually like family deaths and stuff like that. But I remember just being like, I can't hold it in, and it's terrible. Do you remember where you were?
I do. So we're going to get into that. First, let me introduce our guest. Rusty Clark is a retired Mississippi Bureau of Investigation agent, and he worked this case. So while a lot of the people you saw on TV and saw on the front lines were working the case as well, Rusty and his team were behind the scenes, really churning the wheels, trying to find the people that were involved. Rusty, tell us about you first, and then I'm going to bring the case up, and we can talk about that.
Sure. Rusty Clark, just retired last year after 30 years in law enforcement. Done everything, from police officer. I was a police officer for 6 years in Hattiesburg and Gulfport. Then I got on the patrol in 2000. Worked there for 24 years and retired last year. And, my last 10 years plus were in MBI. And, but my last, what was that, 2005 to 19 years, almost 20 years were doing investigations. I started off for the first 8 years of that was accident reconstruction, and, which is a totally different type of investigation, but, we were working homicide deaths, people driving drunk, people and killing other people, and people, going way too fast for a condition or something like that to cause a death, and worked a lot of those cases, and then I got into the criminal investigations, and started off real slow. Got in there in 2013. Really didn't do a lot that first almost year, really. It was real slow. I think we didn't have a real great working relationship with area law enforcement. And my first introduction into a big case is I helped our special operations group. And Jimmy Herzog, who's the head of MBI now, was leading that group. And we had a case, and I can't remember the name of the guy, but he had killed a woman and a small child, and we looked for him for all day long and all night. We finally got a confession late at night, and we drove down to Copiah County in the middle of nowhere. I tell people all the time it was like a horror movie, and because we parked on, he was like, "Just stop here," and we didn't see anything. He said, "Shine your light over there," and there was a house about 100 yards off the road, like in the trees, real old, dilapidated, just a very old house. Probably nobody had lived there for probably 30 years. And myself and he was Captain Herzog then, got out, and Wayne Watson stayed in the car with the suspect. And we walked over to the house, and, were scared to death. I'm a big guy. Jimmy's a big guy. And, it was nerve-wracking because we didn't know what we were going to expect. We were just told that he had, killed 2 people. We didn't know if we had people waiting on us there that, somebody that was with him, didn't know what was going on. And we were about 50 feet maybe from the house, and a screech owl.
Oh, no.
And I thought I was going to die right there. Even Jimmy said that, but, we found the lady and the little boy in there, and they were both dead. And that's where it started. And then March of the next year, I worked my first case and didn't really slow down. Kingston was in May of 2017, and I was in the midst of the busiest streak of my career.
Sure.
Not streak, but busiest time of
There
my
were a lot
career.
of big cases, yeah.
I worked 11 murders in Yazoo County alone in that 16, 17 time period.
Sure.
And, on top of other murders that I was working also. So, yeah.
Well, and in this same time frame, we had Kingston, we had a quadruple homicide in Yazoo County, I believe. Yeah. Shortly after, in May of 2017, was the Brookhaven 8 people killed.
Yeah,
and
I actually went to the hospital on that and, talked to that guy.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
And not long after that was the 16 servicemen that were killed in the plane crash in the Delta. That was a busy time of life for
I was still working the quadruple homicide in Yazoo. That happened in February. When this happened in May. And I was still in the midst of all that, because not only did Riddell Barber, he confessed to killing those 4 people that night, but he also confessed of killing another person the year before that. So we got 5 murders cleared that one instance. But, there was a lot to that. And, even though they confess, there's still a lot of court hearings and a lot of things that go on. And, it's just time consuming, and a lot of reports and a lot of court time.
Sure. So that brings us to May of 2017. To set the stage for you, just from a reporter standpoint, I got up that morning and went to boot camp and worked out. I got an alert on my phone, or a text. I don't remember which. I guess it was the Amber Alerts maybe that went out. But I knew when I was leaving that we had a missing child. I was able to gather on the way home that he had been in the back of a car. The car had been stolen. And I got in the shower to get ready for work. And in the shower, I started crying and just sobbing, and I did not know why. And all of a sudden it struck me, that little boy is dead. I didn't even know his name yet, but I already knew that. To set the stage for what we ended up reporting, of course, you have a mother. She was on her way home from going out with friends that night. She said she's got her 6-year-old son in the back. She had picked him up from the babysitter, and she stops at Kroger. On her way in, she notices a Hinds County deputy. And on her way out, she realizes her car is missing, and she turns and she goes and finds him and tells him that her car's missing. That is what kicked off the whole entire thing. And Nicole, you've done some research into this, so you've seen up to that point.
Yes.
You understand. I mean, you know how kind of people were reacting at that point.
Yeah, I think, rightfully people were, at that point when it first happened and the Amber Alert went out, people are just wondering like what's going on, because anytime you get an Amber Alert, everybody gets those big notifications and it like wakes you up in the middle of the night. And this did happen in the middle of the night. So I think the Amber Alert went out like in the middle of the night, did it not?
Yes.
Essentially.
Yeah.
Early morning.
Right. Yeah.
Most people are still sleeping. But I think everybody just kind of panicked. And for the general public, I think the first reaction is always like, you keep your eye out. And you don't really expect something so bad to happen, because I heard about it when everybody else heard about it. You know, I wasn't in this field where I would get that information or like hear it right off the bat. I would get it when the news brought it out, and that, you know, everybody knows now that you kind of have to wait for the police report to come out and do all, you know, take the right steps. And so for me, it was just like, let's find him.
Yeah.
You know, maybe it was just an accident. Maybe his dad took him, or maybe a family member, or maybe it was just something silly. We don't ever go to something terrible has happened. You know, that reaction that I had was after it came out on the news, and then all the pieces are put together. And so I'm living through it in a human lifetime.
Yeah.
Whereas you're just constantly, you just kind of get thrown into it. And
Rusty, is it fair to say that one of the things that makes this hard is that we're so used to those cases like she's talking about? We think, let's find them. And you almost always do in the case of a stolen car with a kid in it. They almost always stop and let them out somewhere. Talk to us about the police side of this. How did it start for you guys?
Well, it started for us guys at 1:30 in the morning. Trent Weeks, who was that on-call agent that night, received a call and stating what had happened, and that the Hinds County Sheriff's Department was wanting to do an Amber Alert. So anytime I don't know what the process is now, but back then, if an agency was wanting to do an Amber Alert, we sent an agent there. That way, it just cuts down on the information flow. And I think you were actually on the Amber Alert team for a short time, and you know it's a hectic, busy. You know, everything has to be factual, and you can't. You know, people don't like getting woken up anyways, and you know that's a whole nother issue. But you know, we want everything that we send out to be factual and correct, and do it in an efficient manner. And so he got called out at 1:30. I wasn't on call that night, and he was just going to assist with the Amber Alerts information. So I didn't find out about it until the next morning. You know, I'd gotten the alerts in the middle of the night, but I'd, you know, just read it and cut it back off, and got up the next morning and got the kids ready for school, and made sure they got off, and was heading to the office. And I can't remember if I was at the office or if I was on the way to the office, but it was around 9:15, 9:30. Lieutenant Troy Travis, he was a lieutenant at the time, called and said, "Hey, they've found the vehicle." So that was my first dealings with any of it. And really nobody had done it. I mean, they had gotten some video from Kroger and, you know, had been working the Amber Alerts and phone calls. And, but that was really the first time that we had actually had a good sighting of the vehicle.
Sure. And during this time, we also know that Jackson Police Department and Hinds County, and there was some back and forth about who was supposed to tell who and who had jurisdiction and that kind of thing, but they had immediately started looking as well. And it really was, I can't remember a case where there was such a scramble. And I feel like it's kind of, once you've been around this stuff long enough, you have a feeling in your gut when it's not a good one. And I feel like everyone had that instinct. Nicole, did you read anything, or do you know anything about what the family was doing during this time?
No, but I would like to set this, what, his family?
Yeah.
No, actually I did not.
Oh, that's okay.
Who in his family?
Well, we had at that time, we had a couple of different reporters that were with his family. His uncle was David Archie, who is a politician in the Jackson area, and his mother was, you know, of course, his niece. And so they were actually very active in talking about this to begin with. So they were out there, and they were, you know, it was not just the scramble by law enforcement. It was the communities were gathering because the family had already had such an influence. But you saw very much, they were already organizing press conferences and stuff to get out there and say, please bring Kingston back. If you're out there with Kingston, bring him back.
Wow.
Yeah, not to get ahead, but that's the whole horrible thing about this is that
it didn't have to go like this. Yeah. I think that to me was the part that as I relived it, as I prepared for this, there was very much the feeling of, like I said, we all knew something was badly wrong at first, but then the feeling that like, no, my gut can't be right because who would hurt a 6-year-old boy? So that said, Nicole, you had something you were about to say.
Yeah, I was going to set the stage, and I also as I was reading, I read the Dwans versus the Mississippi, Wakefield versus the state of Mississippi, and it goes into graphic detail about how he was found.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think about a child being shot, you don't imagine it.
Hold up a second. We're going to get there in a second.
What?
I didn't mean to scare you. No, you can finish your thought.
I didn't imagine it would be that bad.
Yeah. Yeah. So at this point, we're to the place where they have found the vehicle. From a reporter standpoint, there was a lot of details that were going around. Like I had heard they found a car in Gluckstadt they thought was the right car. And remember, reporters get half the story. So I hear that we may have found the car, but I also, that was, I'm hearing that between 9:30 and 10. Around 10, we get an alert, or not an alert, we get a call that Kingston has been found safe and alive in Greenwood. So
I don't know anything about that. I don't remember any of that.
Well, that's the crazy thing. So in our newsroom, we were all, and if you read the old Clarion Ledger stories, you see where we were updating as it went. So it was 9:15, 10 o'clock update, Kingston has been found safe in Greenwood. And then 10:05 update. So it was within 5 minutes, a car has been found in Gluckstadt. And I remember I had heard multiple times that he was deceased in that car. But when we heard he was found in Greenwood, I thought, oh, good.
Right.
But now here we are. Of course, we all go straight to that scene. Were you there in Gluckstadt?
Yeah, I went. That's where I first went because Lieutenant Travis Troy had asked me to go and interview the people who had found the vehicle. It was a couple that owned, I can't remember if it was an auto repair shop or some kind of, scrap yard, but there's a train track that kind of cut the road off, and their house was on one side of the tracks, and their business was on the other side of the track, but they had to drive a way around to get to it. And the gentleman that found them, the owner of that business, I was going to interview them, and when I got there, of course, saw the vehicle, saw Kingston, and so I went and interviewed the couple, and then things just started happening because before that time, around 8 o'clock that morning, from the vehicle description that had been put out, all that kind of stuff, because there was good video at Kroger of what happened, and I was watching it today, and I don't want to get ahead of myself,
sure.
but Byron McBride, who actually killed Kingston, gets out of the car, walks over to the Camry, goes back to the car with Dwan Wakefield and DeAllen Washington in it, comes back to the car, opens the door, gets in, gets out, and starts looking for the car. And they had pulled out like they were getting ready to leave, to kind of go with them. And all I could think was I wonder if they would have been still sitting where they were if he would have gone back. Because in my mind, all I'm thinking is, when I was watching this today, I was like, he knew that kid was in there then.
Yeah.
And, it's 20 minutes at most to Gluckstadt from the Kroger there.
Mm-hmm.
40 stores to pull into.
All he had to do was take him out of the car right there and put him on the sidewalk.
Oh yeah, or take off walking.
Right.
Or whatever.
Now, Nicole, you were going to say something about what you had read in DeJuan Wakefield's court case.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
You want me to talk about it?
Yeah, go ahead and say that.
Okay, so in the court documents, it goes into, of course, it goes into graphic detail about how he was found. So, and correct me if I'm wrong. In the court documents, it said that he was found in the back seat on the floorboard in the fetal position with 4 gunshots, 1 in each arm, 1 in his eye, and 1 in the back of his head.
That's correct.
And I think that I had to reread it because I was like, there's no way. There's no, I can't even comprehend doing it once, but what is going on? What happened? Why? And I think that's the craziest part about this is there is no why. And there's all these, if you just want to take a car, then take the car. You can't tell me that a 6-year-old is going to be like, what are you doing? He's going to be asking for his mommy. There's no way within 22 seconds. I have plenty of friends with 6-year-olds. They don't shut up.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not, I'm so, not in a bad way, but
it's true. Yeah.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, right. Let's cut to a break. But, he was clearly, you don't just, and that was his excuses. I didn't know he was there and blah, blah, blah. And for a Camry.
Now, Rusty, you interviewed these suspects.
Yeah.
And I know a statement that was made during this time that was why. Talk to us about, develop the suspects for us. Tell us who you guys came up with.
So the owner of the vehicle called and said, hey, that's my vehicle. It's got a dent in the door. I can't remember if it was her son or nephew or who it was. She said, so-and-so kicked the door last year and I just never got it fixed. So I know that's my vehicle. And she said, DeJuan's driving and, or DeJuan's the one who had it. And, so, that gave a better picture of who was in the vehicle. We didn't know anybody else.
Now, this is the second vehicle that DeJuan and D'Allen were in. Yes.
Correct. And, someone finds the vehicle, sees the vehicle. I don't know if it was the police or a citizen, finds the vehicle. They go. I think the FBI or the marshals were the ones that were first on the scene. I believe. I'm not 100% sure about that, but they get DeJuan in custody. He's running down the road. I think you probably have seen the video footage that was on the news of him in the middle of the street and giving himself up. And, it was, so that was 10:15-ish probably. So now he's been gone for 8 hours, and, but, the car had been found about an hour before that. So, yeah, DeJuan was the first one that was arrested. Troy asked me he said, you're there. He said, I know you interview a lot of people. He said, I want you to interview them. So me and L.A. Oliver, he was a captain at the time, I believe. He's still with MBI. He and I interviewed DeJuan, and it was just frustrating because, he clearly knew what was going on, but didn't want to say. And the longer we talked to him, we would, every time he would tell the story, he would give us a little something else, and, give a little something else. And it just went on for a couple of hours until we finally had enough to know that D'Allen Washington and Byron McBride were with him. And, so during this, we were, that was the first time that we had heard Byron. We had heard D'Allen because the aunt, I can't remember her name, Honey or something like that.
Yeah.
I can't remember. I believe it said,
Honey Yates, I believe. I
think that's correct.
Yeah.
And, she was actually raising about 6 or 7 of these kids. But, we had heard D'Allen's name, but we had not heard Byron's name. So we had to get some folks in on that. and DeJuan had identified him as the one who shot him. And you know, DeJuan was never, in my opinion, fully truthful with us, but he was easy to read. So you know, we knew that he was when he said things that were truthful and when he was trying to be deceitful. You know, you could just pick up on a little of that. And but we got Byron's name and we figured out who it was, and he was from Holmes County. He wasn't even from down here. And,
Somehow that does not shock me a bit.
well, you know,
There's a whole crew of them in Holmes County that
that's
cause all the trouble.
That's a whole nother podcast.
We need to do. I'm going to go ahead and say this. Just be ready. We're going to do a Holmes County podcast.
Holmes
Dun, dun,
County
dun, dun.
has their own driver's license, not a real one, but
Yeah.
What?
yeah,
What do they do with it?
you can drive. You can do you cash checks with it.
It's
It's another world.
Yeah,
I
no.
don't have I been to
Holmes
Holmes County,
County-
Tyler? I mean,
It's
for us?
so we did the podcast with Ashley Martin. Her son went missing in Holmes
Yeah.
County.
yeah,
Holmes
yeah.
County has its own. I don't think you've been there.
Okay, have you taken me there?
I've not taken
I
you
always have to
there.
ask, have you
No,
taken
it
me there?
has its own law and order, and that is more.
Order, not even well.
There is no
No,
law
it's
and order.
like its own.
Yeah.
It's
Wow.
we L.A. and I had worked a case where a guy had escaped jail and gone and killed his girlfriend and kidnapped his son and held him all night. Yeah, Holmes County. But anyway,
I've talked to people on the streets who say that's where you go if you want to kill someone and never get caught. So we'll end the Holmes County discussion
To
there
be continued.
and go ahead and get started.
But these guys are younger, right?
Yeah, DeJuan was a football player at Ridgeland High School,
Right.
and I believe he was pretty good.
He was
I
well
think he
known,
played
yeah.
quarterback, and you know he was a good looking kid.
Yeah.
You know, had some future. You know, for college. You know, if he just played, he could have gone to junior college and you know done anything. And you know, just he was trying to sell some weed that night in the Kroger parking lot, and ran into Byron somewhere, and we never got the full story of all that.
Wow.
But, anyway, so DeJuan gives us his statement and all that. So we develop Byron as a suspect and as the shooter. So we get a warrant for him, and of course the absolute best thing you can do with a warrant is give it to the Marshals Task Force.
Absolutely.
And so they had him wrapped up. You know, this was probably 12 when we interviewed DeJuan, and DeJuan, and it may have been 1:30 or so by the time we got to Byron McBride, and they had him in custody at 3:30, I think, around there. Actually, it's 3:45, and you know, so between DeJuan and Byron, DeAllen turns himself into the Hinds County Sheriff's Department with his attorney, Warren Martin,
Mhm.
and they bring him up there to the Madison County Sheriff's Department where I am, and we get him in there, and we talk to Warren and talk to DeAllen. They, you know, of course, you know, he's got an attorney, so they're not going to give a statement, which is his right. But
Yeah.
you know, anytime you've got a kid that's missing and something's happened to a kid, you feel like, you know, if you knew anything, you would want to tell that. But, you know, I understand that you have rights, and that's it's not a game, but it is, you know.
Sure.
And that's the way I've always looked at it. You know, lawyers are there to represent their clients, and that's why we live in the greatest country on earth.
Mm-hmm.
And but you know, it's my job to be better than the lawyer, and that's asking a lot for someone without a law degree. And you know, but I just worked really hard at that, you know, to make sure that I always did everything by the book, and you know, did it the right way. But you know, DeAllen didn't give a statement, so we were still there when they found Byron, and they brought him up there, and we started talking to him, and you know, that interview lasted a couple of hours. I think we started with him about 4:00. Maybe they had him at 3:45, and he was with me at 4:15, I know.
Sure.
And so we talked to him. He denied, they did it. I got out at the Exxon in Gluckstadt. No, you didn't. I mean, there's 40 cameras at the Exxon in Gluckstadt.
Sure.
And Sonic, so we know you weren't there because we've looked at everything in Gluckstadt at this time trying to find anything. And, only in the interview sometime, he finally just says, I did it. I shot him. And, it's just such a waste, He had been in some trouble before also up there. And, but, the house I was telling y'all about earlier out in the woods, that was my first murder investigation I'd been involved in. That was a 7-year-old boy that night that got shot in the back with a shotgun. And, but this one,
It was, I think, what made it hard for all of us is, like I said, it was like even for the ones of us, the investigators, the reporters, who are used to that kind of, to having our hearts broken by the things we do for a living, you just don't expect to come across that kind of evil. And to kind of give you the reporter's perspective of all this, we had heard about DeJuan. Everybody was reporting on the football star that, shouldn't be involved in this and the wasted life. And then what we had heard was that D'Allen Washington was feeling terrible about the whole thing, that he was the conscience of the group. And then we heard of Byron McBride. So, of course, during all this, if you know anything about me, I was scrambling to find gang affiliations and, who are these kids and all this kind of stuff. I had a friend on the Marshals Task Force that was able to tell me when those guys were coming into the sheriff's department. So I was back behind the back watching them come through the breezeway. And, of course, you're trying desperately to read this guy's body language as he walks by.
Yeah.
And you just hope you can see something that'll tell you if there's a why or what's the evil here or whatever. And I don't have a strong memory. Like, I remember it. I remember watching the video over and over again while I edited it. But I remember when Byron McBride came through, all I could think was, I think at that point I had someone tell me that he had said something, that one of the others had said that he said something about, I'm going to do him or something, that his intent was he was going to get his first kill here.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah. That. I can't remember. Well, it had to have been DeJuan because we didn't talk to D'Allen, but it was something along the lines of, of course, DeJuan was trying to downplay his role in any of this, but he had said, hey, just let him out, and he was like, I can't. He's seen me, and I don't think there was much after that. He said, I'm gonna have to do him or shoot him or whatever he said, and.
I feel like he used a euphemism. If it wasn't him, it was some kind of euphemism.
It was something like that. And, and then they went up to Gluckstadt to pick Byron up after he had told him he had shot him. And so they get in the car and they go and drop Byron off at the apartment complex where he was staying. And they get back out on 55 and they're going down and they look over to the left, and there's cop cars and ambulances and fire trucks, I'm sure, and all kind of things over there. And, he tried to play the innocent card enough, but we know at that time he pulled his phone out and deleted everything. And so, he could have pulled in there and said, hey, this is what just happened, and he would have gone from a suspect to a witness.
He would have been a hero.
He'd have been a hero. Not a hero because he could have maybe stopped it beforehand, but he'd at least been out of all the trouble that he was about to find himself in. And, I just remember all three of them, DeJuan, D'Allen, and Byron. DeJuan was, stocky and, a good-looking kid, but young, and D'Allen was a little scrawny thing. And, he looked like he was, 11. He was, 17 or so at the time, 18 maybe, I don't even know. And Byron was 5 foot nothing. He was a little old bitty thing. you don't ever know. You just don't ever know. And, yeah.
I think it was so shocking, at least from where we sat, as we tried to profile these kids. You know, I mean, a reporter's whole job at a time like this is to find out who just did this thing, you know. And as we looked into it, I mean, like I said, everyone is playing up because everyone knew who DeJuan Wakefield was.
Yeah.
So that was easy. You know, we've got football film of him, you know, so he's the one that's getting all the press. And then, you know, like we knew D'Allen showed up with his attorney. So we knew like there's something about this kid that's made him be like smart enough to get an attorney, you know.
Yeah.
But also, like I said, the rumblings underground were this one's the one with the conscience. He's the one that's going to turn the case, which it turns out it sounds like he didn't even talk. But then Byron was the one that we couldn't find anything on. There was nothing out there about him.
And you know, we didn't know anything. And I think his sister, maybe, his sister, I believe, sister, aunt, niece, wasn't his mother, but I believe it was his sister, worked for the DA's office up there. And you know, it's just, you just never can think that somebody that young can be that evil. And then, you know, of course, we've had other cases that, you know, disprove that wholeheartedly. That, you know,
do you feel like in a case like that, it may not be? It's almost like they are too young to understand what evil it is until they've done it, and then they're in it. I mean, do you feel like there's some like? I feel like sometimes when I look at some of these suspects that are so young, they're pulling a trigger. They're not thinking, I'm taking a life.
Yeah.
But once that life is taken, then all of a sudden they are something different.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for some of them it's like that, you know, and a lot of it's being young and doing something and just pushing it too far, and, you know, before they realize that there are going to be consequences to what they do. And whether that's, you know, drinking and driving or getting in a fight somewhere, or, you know, going into the wrong place at the wrong time, or, you know, thinking that they're bigger and badder than they are, and, you know, getting themselves in some kind of trouble, you know, trying marijuana or trying Xanax or trying, you know, some of these other things. And, you know, some of that stuff's really bad now because you don't ever know what's in it. You know, fentanyl, you know, can kill. Just like one little hit of it, you know, if it's the wrong chemical composition, it can kill. And, you know, it just, you know, you just can't take those chances anymore. You know, I did a lot of stupid stuff when I was a kid, you know, and even when I was, you know, senior in high school, freshman, sophomore in college, you know, I did stupid stuff. I think we all did. Luckily, we didn't have cameras back then. And, you know, by the grace of God, I didn't do anything too foolish. And, but yeah, I think these kids, there's no end to the action. You know, they play Call of Duty, they play, what are these other games, these Grand Theft Autos, and there's, you know, killings becomes a fun thing. And then I think for some of them, they don't know where reality and video gaming stops, or, you know, whatever the case may be. And this, you know, I feel like what do they call old people?
We're old people.
What do they call this again?
Boomer, whatever it is. But, you know, I feel like that. But, you know, even like the music is different. Like we didn't have music that glorified killing. You know, when I was in high school, my senior year or so is when, you know, NWA came out, and what they said was awful, but it ain't nothing like this. Like this, I mean, that stuff is tame compared to what's out now. And
well, and I think so. I mean, obviously, you and I have seen all kinds of video in our career, Nicole, there's a video that I think I showed you back in the day when we worked together.
Mm-hmm.
But it was two kids in a parking lot. One has a gun. Well, they both have a gun. One has a rifle style gun. The other one has a handgun. And they're mouthing off at each other. And you can see this unfold. And the one with the rifle kind of raises it and then puts it down and turns to walk away. And the other one pulls out his gun and shoots him in the head. And all you can sit there are so many questions in your mind. Why do they both have guns? Why are they not in
Right.
school? And there are all these things that, of course, we think because we don't live in that community. We don't, that's not a part of the world that we're familiar with. And all I could think was that kid just showed him his gun, like, don't mess with me. And as soon
Right.
as he turned around thinking he's not going to mess with me, that's when he got killed.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there are just rules out there that are like that. But in this case, you're not dealing with, two kids with a street beef. You're talking about a 17-year-old and a 6-year-old.
Right.
Who don't even know each other. Like, there wasn't even like
No relation.
there wasn't any sort of
No relation.
anybody doing anything. You know what I mean? And that's the
Right.
crazy part. It was just a random kid.
Well, and to me, so I guess, Rusty, what I'm dying to know is when you talk to Byron, what was he like?
Once you talked to him, you kind of knew that if it wasn't this, it was going to be something else. And he didn't have a future. He was destined to go to prison, and he just didn't have a soul. And there are others that I've been around that I think were probably more evil than him.
Yeah.
But he was like, when I was talking to him, and finally he just like, yeah, I did it.
Mhm.
What'd you do? Well, I shot him. How many times did you shoot him? I don't know, 8, 9, 10 times. How can you say that about a 6-year-old kid? It's just I guess is it the value of life? I don't know. It's just
Did he explain at all why he shot him in the way that he did?
said he saw him and didn't want him to identify him. He's 6 years old. He's not going to identify anybody.
Does
Well-
that make it frustrating for you when people are just kind of nonchalant about it? Does that make you want to shake him and be like, what's wrong with you? Or do you just kind of have to take the emotions out of it and get through the day?
You take the emotions out as much as you can.
Right. I feel like if I saw a little bit of remorse, you'd be like, at least you know you're a shitty person. But if they're not, then you just want to backhand them. I couldn't be a cop.
Yeah, I worked
There's a reason I'm not a cop either.
Yeah, I worked a child fondling. I don't even know how to say it correctly. What he did is awful. He was a cop in Florida,
Mm.
and his wife had a daycare. And I remember we got through, and he confessed to it, and it took a while, but I got him to think that it was okay. If you're thinking this
You had to
and doing
talk
this,
to him like that, yeah.
and you have to. And we got through with the interview, and I was like, "Is there anything else you want to say?" I do that in just about all my interviews. And he was like, "Yeah, can I go back to work now?" And I was like, "Hold on just a second." And I walked down the hall, and I was like, "It's the end of the interview," and cut the thing off. And I walked in there, and I was like, "You must be out of your mind."
Mhm.
I wanted to take him up there in his uniform shirt and everything, and but I didn't say it quite that nice to him.
Sure.
But
Well, and I think that's an important
so
part.
yeah, you do lose your cool sometimes, but
That makes you feel better.
yeah. Most of the time it's when you're done,
Right.
and I think that's what causes a lot of problems for a lot of officers, and there's a lot of spotlight on mental health and things like that for soldiers coming back from, global war on terrorism and all those years that they were over there. But there's really never anything for law enforcement.
Yeah.
And, I don't know, because I wasn't over there fighting that war, but I was here fighting this one. And I don't know. It's just, I don't think people care about police.
I think that this is what we're talking about here is something that is important to me to talk about because that's something that, people, they listen to what's in the media or they watch a cop show and they think it's real and, that kind of thing. But most people in this world have not had to look a child molester in the face and know that they have to talk to him in a certain kind of way that makes him think that I'm on your side so that he'll confess so that he can be punished in the way that he deserves.
Yeah.
Most people have never been shot at. Most people have never, had to come into a place where someone has been murdered and put those pieces together and sit there with the body. And I mean, I put a picture on Facebook a couple of years ago, and if you just look at the picture, it's a dark night. There's water on the road. You can see red and blue lights in the background, and there's a woman running. And I said, if you've never seen this, then you don't know. But you already know what that was. It was a mama who had just realized that her son had been killed and she was running towards the crime scene.
Yeah.
And the thing is, these are things that the world doesn't see. And then they expect police to be able to relate on a normal level. And I'm way past that, and I'm not a cop. And so to me, that's part of, just so that if you're listening, that's part of the reason we have this podcast is so that you hear this side of the story too. It's not just the stuff that the media is splashing all over the place. DeJuan Wakefield, football star, he was really just out selling pot. He didn't have anything to do with this. There became a whole narrative that was about free DeJuan. And you know what he knew about? He could have stopped this. He could have told somebody. He could have done several things. But just to kind of bring it back home, I just want to say I remember before I was into all this. Now, I grew up around cops, and my dad was a prosecutor. But I was a junior high teacher and a bartender in Holly Springs when a little girl was kidnapped. Somebody shot her in the back of the head with a shotgun and dumped her in a shed out in the middle of nowhere. And when the police found her, she was alive. There was not much left of the back of her skull, but the maggots had covered it and had cauterized the wound. So she was alive, and she was able to tell them who the suspect was and all that. And I couldn't, as a civilian who had not dealt in these kind of things, that rocked me to my very core. Who would do that? I want to say she was maybe 8 years old. I mean, it was one of those kind of situations. Now, that was too much for me. And if you're listening to this and you're not like a hardcore crime junkie, I bet that was too much for you too. Now be a cop, and that's your daily routine. That's something you do. Like Rusty was saying, he worked 11 cases in Yazoo County alone that year. That doesn't include this case or any of the others that MBI was working on or any of the other law enforcement agents all over the state, all over the country. So that is part of the reason we do this podcast.
Yeah, and I was just for I don't know what the correct word is. I'm just having a blank, but I became friends with a captain in Los Angeles Police Department who was the captain over the Hollywood division, and I was asking him, I was at a homicide management training or course or seminar, whatever it was, a week-long thing. And I said, how many murders do y'all work a year? And he said, the most we let any investigator work in a year is 5. And I was like,
incredible.
Man, that'd be
wow.
easy. I'd love to only work 5. And because no year from 2014 to 2020, I don't think I ever worked anything close to 5.
It was like 5 a week, maybe.
Yeah, it was wild. You had Walter Armstrong on a couple weeks ago talking about Raphael McLeod. I was on that for the first however long that was, and that was a scary situation, because he could have. We all thought he was going to kill more that time, and
that's something else I don't think people think about is it's not just standing between good and evil. It's not just chasing down the evil. It's the urgency.
Yeah.
If we don't find this guy, what happens next?
Yeah, and even with this, with Byron, that's, I don't know what the marshals do. I don't want to know. But, if I had a warrant for anybody, I gave it to the marshals. The guy that I worked the quadruple murder in Yazoo City earlier that year, in February of that year. You know, we had him quick thanks to the marshals, you know, and it's just, you know, that luckily we have them, and everybody, you know, they do a phenomenal job.
They do.
Always have, and you know, without them, this whole area would be in a lot bigger mess. And
Now, let me jump in here and remind everybody, we didn't even tell y'all, remember, you can ask questions. All you have to do is comment on Facebook if you're watching right now, and it'll pop up on our screen so we can see it. We got so into this so fast, I think I wasn't even thinking about what everybody else wants to know.
I looked up and I was like, what is 45 minutes?
Right. Oh, my gosh.
It feels
has
like
gone
it's been
fast.
15.
So I guess, Rusty, tell us, what was it like when you finally had all three of them and you kind of had them in a place? Like, maybe you couldn't do anything with D. Allen because he had an attorney, but you had a confession for Byron. You had DeJuan at least cop into some of it. What's that? When do you go home and breathe?
well, we probably got through with Byron 6 or so. We wrote arrest warrants, bench warrants, or affidavits and bench warrants for all three of them. We had to type up reports from all that. Then you have to go home, but then you got to get up the very next morning and come back for their initial appearance. And, you know, it just like that first day, we had it all done in 18 hours, I guess. But that's not the easy part, but the short part. The rest of it takes forever. You know, then you have to kind of figure out why. You know, there was so much going on then. You know, we had the Robert Schuler Smith wanting it to be in it. We weren't letting that happen. And, you know, Commander Jones at the time, Sheriff Jones now, you know, he's great. He's phenomenal. But, you know, we weren't going to let Robert Schuler Smith have a part of that. And Michael Guest was the district attorney at that time. And we just really stuck to our guns and got it all there in Madison County. And luckily, we only had one trial, I believe. Byron pled, D. Allen pled, and then DeJuan, you know, went on his little world adventure and lived his best life. But I think that turned around to be a downfall for him.
Yeah, I looked it up. DeJuan is in prison until 2048. D. Allen's in prison until 2027.
Yeah, but I think D. Allen got arrested he got out and then got back in on something else, didn't he?
Yeah, he did, I think.
Yeah. And he was like a year or two above my son. They both went to the same school at one time, and I didn't know him, and my son didn't know him, but just what a waste, you know.
I think at one point, one of the things that we talked about was that it was not just one life lost; it was 3.
Oh, it's 4.
Yeah, I mean, 4. Sorry,
Yeah.
I don't do math.
And you know, and poor Ebony, she went through the ringer. And
Kingston's mom.
Yeah. What they tried to do to her was
right
criminal
in the beginning.
itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, we talked about the RG family being very vocal in the beginning and, you know, find Kingston and stuff. How were they throughout the entire process, and his mom especially?
Just like any grieving family is.
Is there allowed, you know, is there justice for Kingston?
No, I don't.
Or were they?
I'm not a big believer in the word justice, just so you know. Only justice will come later.
Mm.
You know, one thing I remember about that time is that everyone had this thing on their Facebook that was something Kingston had made at school. It was a green piece of paper with an orange handprint on it. He had written his name the teacher had written his name underneath it. And that was like almost the sign of solidarity that everyone was using at the time, especially after he was found. It was like, I think the whole community, the whole metro, the whole state, because I've seen it on my friends that, North Mississippi and that kind of thing. It was like just the sheer disbelief that something like this could have taken place. And I think desperately trying to find in that innocence of that picture some solace for what had happened.
Well, I read I only read it one time, so I don't know if it's true, but was it the day of his kindergarten graduation or around the same time?
Yes.
Right, like he had just graduated kindergarten. And
I think so, because I believe I remember a picture of him in his
I
his
saw a
kindergarten.
picture of his little kindergarten thing,
Yeah.
but there was only one place where it said it was the day of his graduation.
I don't know.
And if you've ever been a single parent with kids, you go to the grocery store when you can.
We did that all the time growing up. Like
Yeah.
I remember when I first heard about it, I was like, my parents did that a lot. And I don't know if that's not right to say now, but in the 90s, that's just how it was. We're going to run into the store and grab whatever we need, or into the gas station to pay for this gas. Don't touch anything and sit down.
Yeah.
And he was just like, first of all, he wasn't running around the car.
Asleep.
He was asleep in the back of the car. And I think that everything came out. Well, why would she possibly do that? He's sleeping in the back of the car. You have a 6-year-old. You're a single mom in the middle of the night. Like, she made a mistake.
Yeah.
Well, and even then, like you said, it's a mistake that all of our parents have made.
Right.
I stayed in the car.
Heck, I probably did it with my boys, at some point.
Yeah, I mean
like you.
If the world wasn't so bad, that's not a bad thing to do.
She was raked over the coals, and
I know.
it was
Yeah.
awful.
Yeah.
And
she lost her life that day too.
oh yeah,
it just goes on from there.
Yeah.
Lots of people.
There were so many rumors and all that about her, and
right. What she was doing there, who she was meeting.
I think there was even
blah.
one that it was a retaliation for something that she had done or somebody in her family had done, and it was nothing to do with that. And,
no.
I like social media. I think it's a good thing, but it can be a bad thing at times too.
Oh, yeah.
Because, and I think as law enforcement, we do a bad job of clearing the air sometimes, and there's things that we can do and say that we don't sometimes because we want to be so guarded, and that we could probably squash a lot of that stuff. But I mean, you can't do it for everything that's said, but if you just.
But you're just sitting there going like, you don't even know.
Yeah.
You don't even know.
Right.
And I have that said to me by a lot of cops when there's something going on that I'm covering, and they're like, you don't even have it right. I'm like, then tell me what's right.
Yeah.
And I have a public information officer class that I teach, and I always tell them, like, part of your job is also, to circumvent the rumors.
Right.
Because in this case, we heard so many things about Ebony Archie, and all I could think the whole time is, this is a mama who's lost her baby.
Yeah.
And you know what? Like, she didn't deserve it no matter what she was doing. And she was just at the dang grocery store.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, and to me, I think that's one of the things that I hate the most about everything being so accessible now, is that literally anybody can say anything they want about a situation they know nothing about.
Right.
You read what's in the paper. I'm here to tell you, as one of the main crime investigative reporters in the state for the last decade and a half, you don't know everything if you read the media. No. You know about this much of something this big. You know?
Yeah, I have to remind people that a lot now, that I know that there's like so much more. Everything we find out is just tip of the iceberg. So when they're talking crap at the, wherever, I'm like, you don't even know.
Yeah.
You don't, hush, because you're going to look stupid in just a little bit.
And even I find myself, even now being out of it for almost a year, that, there are times that I'm like questioning something, and I'm like, you only know one part of the story. Yeah. So just wait.
Well, and I want to read a comment that we got from John Neal. He was on here a couple of weeks ago, the former Ridgeland police chief.
Hi, Chief
He
Neal.
says, for some reason it's not popping up on there, but it says, looking good, Rusty. Certain cases you can remember exactly where you were when the call drops. This was one of them. You never forget them.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, for law enforcement across the board. And another poignant moment that I want to relive briefly, we had a press conference, and Commander Jones, at the time, Sheriff Jones now, was talking along with Randy Tucker, the sheriff of Madison County, and Victor Mason, sheriff of Hines County. And it was at the scene. They were just telling us that they had found Kingston. And all of a sudden, a car rolls up. And you can see this if you Google. Car rolls up, and Kingston's dad gets out.
Yeah.
And some people that were with him. And they had not heard until they heard it on the media. The family on the other side had been notified. And it's just burned in my brain because all the cameras turned toward them in their grief, in their, I mean, acting out, but of course. And, everything's focused on them. And I just remember in that moment, I thought, I don't want to be, and I mean, I had my camera on them. But I thought, I don't want to be the vehicle for the whole world to watch this worst moment of this family's life.
Yeah.
And so I just remember turning away from it and saying, I think we've done enough of that. We'll come back and we have more. But just knowing that in these moments, I think it's important to say the world is watching and they're spectators. But the people in the arena, that's you.
Yeah. It all, what is it? Teddy Roosevelt, man in the arena. But
Daniel cheered for Teddy Roosevelt.
Yay.
I like Teddy. Fond of him.
That speech was, I live my life by that.
Yeah.
Don't talk to me if you're not willing to get in there and get bloody yourself.
Mm-hmm.
That's Daniel Anderson with Audio Alchemy Productions. If you need a podcast
100%.
done, hit him up.
I think that's what Pete Hegseth was telling them in his Senate confirmation the other day, that all those senators in their little air conditioned offices trying to tell those soldiers that how to fight a war, and it's unreal what they have to go through. It's like that to some extent, in law enforcement.
Yeah.
It's always been funny to me from the time I started in 1994 up until now. There are more experts in police and law enforcement than any other profession there is. And,
and none of them have
have
any kind of experience in policing.
And, I remember there was something, I don't remember which one of the things in the past 10 or 15 years it was, but I remember I posted a picture of an application like, come on and get you some if you want it. If you know so much and are such an expert at it, we would love to have you. And,
I've seen memes like that before.
Yeah.
I always think they're funny.
So
application.
Every mayor, every person that's a board of aldermen, every county supervisor, every state representative, state senator, governor, all of them are experts at law enforcement.
Right.
And it's just unbelievable.
And then all the people with the Facebook, the degree from the University of Facebook.
Yeah.
So
but that's part of it. And, my dad was in law enforcement, and I'm in law enforcement. I got 2 kids that are in the military. So, I'm always going to stand up for them.
Sure. So let's bring it all home. Rusty, do you have any parting comments about the Kingston Frazier case? Now, what is it? Almost 8 years later?
It'll be 8 years in May.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And just, it's like Chief Neal said, it's just one of those things that'll always stick with you. And there's several of those. And it's just what a waste. What a shame. What a waste. It's just frustrating, it just what could have been, such a cute little kid, and just family support. I've been to murders where 1 or 2 people will show up, and a lot of times a whole bunch of people will show up and scream and holler right at first, but they're not there for the rest of it. The Archies were there from day one, and they were there the whole time. So, he'd have been surrounded by all those people his whole life.
Right. He had a chance.
Yeah.
Nicole, any parting thoughts
Or questions?
or questions?
Man, that's a tough. That whole thing. I knew today would be tough, and I would went into it knowing that I was like, all right, I'm going to put on a brave face because
Yeah.
I don't normally go into the things I know this one's going to be rough on me. I don't have any specific questions about the case. Thank you so much for being here today. If you guys like what you hear, you can stream us on all of your favorite streaming platforms. You can follow us on Facebook. You can follow us on Instagram. I think Therese has a TikTok.
Yes.
Yes, you can follow us on TikTok for the next
3
4
days or something. Yeah.
Hopefully, I know, right? What a tragedy. I just want to say, rest in peace, Kingston, and condolences still go out to the family. I think that's one of those pains it'll never, ever, ever go away. It'll have an impact on our community forever. And
losing a kid is a different thing.
yeah, I truly can't imagine.
Well, and I just want to say, for as long as I am alive, to the Archie family, if you were here, I want to look you in the eye. As long as I'm alive, we will tell the story of Kingston. And we will remind the world that he existed and that he mattered. So, thank you, Rusty.
Yeah.
Thank you for
Russ.
being here.
Thank y'all
Thank you
for
for
having me.
coming. Nicole, thank
Love
you for
you.
being here. I
Thank
love
you for
more.
being here.
And guys, thank y'all for watching. Thank you
Yes.
for listening. Please join us next week. I'm 99% sure I've got us booked up through the middle of February with exciting guests. And I
Yay.
believe next week is Sheriff Jones that we've talked about. Tyree Jones
Oh,
will be
shut
here.
up.
So, yeah. So,
One quick thing about
Sure.
Sheriff Harold Jones when my
yes,
father
he was
passed,
here last week.
when my father passed away, he was still with the Highway Patrol Air Wing, and I was at Gulfport Police Department. He flew to Gulfport and picked me up. And flew me up.
Oh,
We had a great
He
time
was a
with,
good
with
guy,
Sheriff
yeah.
Jones, Sheriff Harold Jones last
Yeah.
week.
yes.
So, and
We
Copiah
did.
County, there was a
Yeah.
link there too, I think.
Before he was Sheriff Jones, Tyree and I worked together on a task force back in the day, and
Oh.
we had a good time. And so I've known him for a long time.
Tyree was a great investigator.
Still is.
Still is, yeah.
He's a social media star now. Though.
That's right.
I like
He
it
is.
when I see him riding around on the horses. I'm like, hey.
Yeah, and
What are
a cowboy. I
And
forget,
a cowboy,
I
yeah.
forget about that.
Yeah, I always see him on the mounted
He's turning
unit.
into a cowboy now.
Yeah.
That's right. So, Tyree, if you're watching, we already know you're a superhero, so just be ready for the questions.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if there are no questions for us, then I guess we will let you guys go. Be here next week, same time, same place. Facebook, download us on all your podcast platforms. Share this with your friends. Thank you to Daniel from
Thank
Audio
you,
Alchemy.
Daniel.
If you need a podcast, that is your man.
Yes.
And we'll see you next week.